Okay, I want to welcome everybody to the podcast today. We're here with Molly Fiore, Ryan Morris. Did I say your last name right?
Yeah.
Fiore? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Got it.
Today we're talking about a little bit of a tougher topic. We're going to talk about suicide, ways to recognize it in others, maybe that they're prone to it, how to prevent it, possibly. It's a pretty staggering statistic when it comes to suicide, and we'll just kind of go wherever this conversation goes. Molly, welcome to the call.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this subject.
Yeah, I think this will be good. I mean, we'll post this up, and hopefully you have a good network that we can share this with as well. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What's your background?
Sure, absolutely. So I think with this topic, that individuals are pretty profoundly touched to come into this line of work.
Yeah.
Because it certainly can be challenging. So for me, growing up in Colorado, really found myself struggling kind of between the transition of elementary school and middle school with depression. And I had no idea that that's what was going on. But all of a sudden I found my life very hard to manage, and it just didn't make sense to me. And didn't have anybody talking about it or telling me, hey, if you notice these things, this could be a mental illness. We weren't having any kind of those conversations at the time. So these challenges really just led to a huge downward spiral for me of very low self-confidence, thinking that I just didn't know how to kind of be in the world, how to make friends. And again, this just continued to get worse through high school. And then it became really hopeless for me that I didn't see this getting better. And with that sense of hopelessness came a lot of suicidal ideation. Tried to kill myself several times, couldn't. And then that just made me feel even more like a failure. And this continued on, just this kind of inner nightmare, which absolutely nobody knew was going on until I really hit crisis and just couldn't do it anymore at 35. And that's, that suicidal crisis was really a turning point for me. But so it's, it started there with my own journey, really struggling without feeling like that sense of help at the time. And so coming out of that suicidal crisis at 35, realized we could do better. How I was experiencing this in schools, we can do better. And how I was experiencing this in our community, how I was treated when I went to the emergency room that night, like, wow, we can do a lot better than this. And so really, that was the turning point of really this becoming my life's work. So I started volunteering for the local suicide prevention coalition. It was just like a sponge. Anything that I can get my hands on that would help educate people and help to turn the tide on this, wanted to do that. So this has been about 10 years for me of working in the field, now becoming a trainer in most prevention intervention trainings you can do. I'm a trainer in those, and just have spent most of my time over the last 10 years trying to make this.
That's quite a background. I mean, you're empathetic toward people who have ideation about suicide because you've been there.
Absolutely. I can really understand how you can get to that space. And one thing that somebody said to me that was so incredibly helpful was, Molly, no one ever got a feeling wrong. In my whole life, I had those messages of, you shouldn't kill yourself, or that's a sin, or, you shouldn't be thinking about this. And that just was the place that I was in. And to give that freedom for right where I was at was hugely helpful.
Wow. Can you go into, let's jump into some statistics. I saw one the other day that said from 1999 to 2014, there was about a 24% increase in suicides. And then from 2014 to 16, it jumped another 40% or so.
Right. I live in Eagle County, and so I'm really familiar with those statistics. And in the last 2 years, in a mountain town here in Eagle County, we've seen the suicide rate higher than has ever been recorded over these last 2 years. And across the nation, suicide has increased in every single state except for one. And I think if any other, health issue, any other thing that had an increase in deaths in every single state except for one, it would be a national crisis. And I think this is really the work that we have to do, that we need to take this serious of what's happening. You know, also some recent statistics coming out for ER visits that I'm not going to say the numbers because I don't want to misspeak and I don't know them exactly spot on, but in ERs, they've seen a huge increase in ER visits for depression, for anxiety, for suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. And one of the largest increases that they've seen is in our youngest generation, you know, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds.
Wow.
Certainly something that we need to address. We need to be having these conversations. We just cannot afford, you know, to ignore this or stick our head in the sand because it makes us uncomfortable. Because I think here's the hope and here's the good news. Of all the causes of death, suicide is the most preventable. You know, and I think that we understand that when it comes to physical health. I mean, just about everybody I've talked to is trained in CPR. And we understand if we know CPR, we can save lives. Well, there's an equivalent for mental health first aid, and you're 10 times more likely to run into a mental health crisis than to use CPR. And again, these trainings are there and they're out there and they're available. We just need to start to change the attitude around mental health.
So what is the process? If somebody's suicidal, they go into an ER, they go for help. I mean, you kind of hinted that that doesn't work. I mean, the way it's set up currently is not working. I mean, what do they experience? What did you experience? Am I wrong in that perception there?
You're not wrong in there. So suicidal ideation is made up of two things. One is thwarted belongingness. I don't belong where I once did. And there's a lot of things that can contribute to this, particularly in the world that we're living in today. It's all about loss. So it can be loss of a job. And we see these in these mountain towns where housing's hard, and certainly individuals can experience like loss of a job or loss of housing, loss of income, loss of finances. You know, we've recently seen, you know, huge financial fraud where so many people have lost everything in those. That can certainly be, you know, one of those pieces of thwarted belongingness, a loss to death, particularly if by suicide, a loss of a major relationship. So again, there's, you know, so many things that can happen out in the world that you're experiencing those loss. And it's not necessarily the event itself, because I'm sure of all the things that I've listed off, many of you listening have navigated one of those, and probably with a lot of resilience. So it's not necessarily to say, hey, if you have lost somebody in a relationship, you're going to be suicidal. But it's really slowing down and looking at and seeing, how is that individual experiencing this loss? And is there a sense of they don't now feel like they belong, you know, where they once did? Maybe that's a sense of loss of purpose or loss of vitality, you know, in our older population, whatever that loss may be. And our kids certainly feel that, you know, with social media and having these smartphones that are on them constantly as an indicator that I'm not good enough, I'm not at that party, my posts don't have as many likes, you know, I could get lost down that rabbit hole quite a while on social media. So that kind of comprises this thwarted belongingness. And then the second piece of this is perceived burdensomeness. I feel like a burden. So I don't belong and I feel like a burden. And together those, you know, really encapsulate that sense of the suicidal ideation. And then there's another piece to it, because, you know, individuals can certainly have thoughts of suicide without taking their life. So that other part is called acquired capacity. And that's, you know, the ability to actually take your life, which is challenging to do. That life preservation is really strong. And that's, you know, another part of the good news is there is this strong instinct to preserve life. And so when there's that capacity to be able to kill yourself, overlapping that suicidal ideation, that's where we have somebody at very high risk. So to give a little bit of a personal account of what that felt like, I've really never experienced something as painful as that. You know, I think that human beings are hardwired to connect. We're social beings, and that's ingrained. And when you fall on the outside of that and feel like I'm not good enough in some way, my life doesn't have value, it is excruciatingly painful. Particularly to think about, the mind frame that I had at the time was the world would actually be better off without me in it. And
Yeah.
I make things worse. I can't seem to get anything right. I can't figure out this thing called life. And honestly, it would be doing the planet a favor if I just remove myself. And it's a painful, painful place to be in, that feeling lonely, feeling desperate, feeling like I'd rather do anything than kill myself, but I just feel like I'm out of options. And
Yeah.
then, the mindset to start thinking about how could I actually do this. And also just terrified of telling somebody, like desperate to want to get the help, desperate for somebody to know so I'm not alone in this nightmare, but then also terrified of what are people going to think if they knew this about me. And my deep-seated fear was that people would hate me as much as I hated myself for having these thoughts. So if I spoke that out and said, I'm thinking of killing myself, my greatest fear is that I was going to be even more shunned, even more
Yeah.
abandoned, more isolated than I already was.
See, Molly, I didn't relate to any of that before going through a divorce, which gave me a sense of loss of meaning, loss of purpose, the burdensomeness, like you talk about. I couldn't relate to that before. But then going through that experience, I can understand how people can have those ideations. I had them. I thought, man, maybe the world is better off without me. And to share that openly with people, there's some taboo around talking about that, and the truth is when you lose meaning and you lose purpose, especially going through a challenging interruption of life, like a divorce or loss of job or loss of finances or death, I can understand how people would have those thoughts. Now, the following through on it, I couldn't do that.
Right.
You talk about the ability to follow through on it. I didn't have that part of the equation. And so it's not an option for me to do that, but for a lot of people it is. And so how can we help them? Like if somebody's going through this and they don't want to talk about it because they're afraid that it's going to cause even more issues, how do we approach that?
What was coming to mind as you were talking about that is, I think that we've come to this space, and, my personal opinion that social media has a lot to do with it. Not
Yeah.
that, there's some real benefits if we use this technology, but I feel like in so many ways, sometimes this technology, uses us and we kind of get sucked into that, into this idea that we need to be perfect, that our kids need to be perfect and have perfect grades and, be perfect in sports, to be the best and to be out in the community volunteering and, just to have everything all buttoned up and taken care of, that they're going to, go to the best college and then get the best job. And, I think that our, being able to edit, the image that we put online projects that, hey, everything over here is all great. My kids are all crushing it in life and we're going to Disney World and this is all amazing. And I'm celebrating, 15 years of marital bliss and it's just all been great. And as we all know, that's not the truth of it, that we're human beings and we struggle and we're not perfect and life is messy. And so I think that, our kids are getting the idea that, hey, everybody else has this all perfect and I'm not perfect, or moms have that idea, or dads, or, whoever it may be. I think we're setting up these standards that, that we're perfect and have everything handled when in reality we don't. And so
Yeah.
I think we just got more honest about what's going on. We got more vulnerable with each other, which is, what we're doing in this conversation right now. And so I think that's one thing that we can really do. And one thing that I really encourage for parents is to start very young and have that space where we can talk about awkward things. We can talk about challenging conversations, whether that's, hey, somebody's picking on me on the playground, or talking about gender identity, or talking about sex, or talking about, these awkward, uncomfortable things. And I think that if we can start that early and create that space where, hey, whatever is going on, it's okay to talk about. And if we could start to change that tide for men, the group that's at greatest risk for suicide, that has the highest rates, is men ages 25 to 64. So we're losing men at an incredible rate to suicide. And I think because they're the ones least likely to be having these conversations or speak up and reach out for that help. So I think that's one piece it really needs to start with, changing these conversations, that we speak up about, hey, I don't have everything handled right now. I'm really struggling. I'm going through a divorce and my world is really falling apart right now and I need some help. I think if we are able to have, groups and platforms and places in the workforce where it's appropriate and, encouraged to talk about those things, I think it starts to teach that help-seeking behavior, which is, the most helpful for somebody in suicidal ideation.
See, I can see that. The idea of vulnerability, of stepping out and telling people, look, this is what I'm going through, is really challenging.
Right.
I'm part of a men's group of divorced dads, and they're all talking about the same thing that I'm going through. I'm not alone in it. But you wouldn't know it. We don't tell people. We're a little bit prideful about it. We talk to each other in a private group, but we don't come out in public and say, hey, I'm going through a divorce. We kind of sneak around it and posts that are difficult, or a meme that resonates with us, but we don't want to directly say it. We'll say it, passively, in a sense, because it's not accepted.
Yeah, it's astounding when you sit down and really start talking to people and hear what they're going through. And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm not even close to being alone with this. But as we look out in the world, and if nobody's talking about it, it certainly can feel like you're alone. And I find this so fascinating that just by asking somebody directly, are you thinking of killing yourself? Are you having thoughts of suicide? Just by asking that question, you can reduce the suicidal ideation by up to 80%.
Holy shit.
Just by asking that question, which I think really speaks to the power of taking it out of the darkness and bringing it into the light. And if you give somebody permission to be able to talk about what's going on, it so relieves that ideation.
Wow. Ryan, what thoughts do you have? What have you been hearing? And
so, as you were talking about that stuff, my daughter had a situation at her school where she had gotten some news that one of her friends had, and a couple other friends were planning to kill themselves on a certain date. And my daughter comes home from school, and luckily we have a really strong relationship. And so she came to us and said something, and said, what do I do about this? I've got this information. I don't know what to do. What do I do? And, we said, well, we've got to go to the school. Like, somebody's got to say something. You hear something, you've got to say something. Because I would want that if it was my kid. I would want a parent, I might get emotional, to call me if my daughter had said something or had made comments, to friends. And I would hope that her friends would speak up. She said something, and it was their plan to do something at the school. And because she said something, they got the help they needed. And I don't know what they were going through, but I know that especially with social media, and Molly was talking about that a lot, is in young, vulnerable minds trying to figure out where they are, what they're doing, and navigate the responsibilities of school and life and parents and growing up, and but also bullies and awkwardness, is and self-esteem issues and all those things that can happen as a young person. I think it's super, super important that we equip these young people and help them to understand that they have value, they have purpose, to build them up, to tear down social, you know, walls and the social norms of the past, and be able to. That's a long-winded comment, but Molly, I think you're doing an amazing job at helping people find their purpose and to be able to get that outreach and help other people. So my hat's off to you. I was sitting here in silence most of this time because I was just soaking it in and learning the things that I can do and what you've done. Incredible, absolutely incredible.
Can you speak, Molly, to the age? I mean, the young kids that are, I mean, I've heard 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds attempting suicide,
Yeah,
which blows my mind.
Molly has. I was looking at her website before this call, and some of the curriculum that you teach in schools and stuff like that. Can you talk about all that stuff?
Sure. So I think I'm correct in this, but I think that the youngest that we've lost in the state of Colorado to suicide is a second grader. So it's, you know, I think some people are thinking like, oh, you know, this is a topic that's hard and we should probably wait to middle school or high school. And that is way too late. You know, that kids are thinking about it first, second, for sure by third grade. But it is starting very young where kids are having these thoughts. And I think that there's a lot of times pushback of, you know, well, I don't want you to come into schools and talk about this because it's going to give kids the idea. And I know that that's a pretty widely held belief that we shouldn't talk about it because it's going to give people the idea to do it. And they've done a lot of research on this. And what they find is that's just not true, that's not what happens. And it's pretty much the opposite of that by talking about it, it provides such relief. Or as you were saying, that it gives our kids the tools to be able to know what to do. Because the reality is this is in our schools. Anxiety, depression, substance use, suicide, it's in our schools. This is stuff that our kids are already dealing with. And, you know, I think that we need to meet them where they're at and give them the tools such that when they hear this, you know, they hear that they're, you know, a group of their friends are planning on killing themselves and have the details and know when, that, you know, what did they do? And it can be a really scary thing for a kid to hear that. Or, you know, in some situations, it's like, hey, I'm going to tell you something, but if you tell anybody, we are not going to be your friends anymore. And that's a tough thing, you know, for kids to wrestle with that of, you know, I don't want to be a snitch. I don't want to be a tattletale, you know, and what if I make it worse by telling somebody? And, you know, that's where these programs are so helpful, starting at the elementary school level of teaching kids, here's what the warning signs are. Do you know how helpful this would have been when I was in elementary school to know that if some of these things start happening, that this is an illness and it's treatable? That would have saved 23 years of a struggle for me if I had just known that. Or teaching kids, hey, if you see this in yourself, or if you see this in somebody else, here's what you do. You know, they use this acronym ACT in one of the curriculums, which is called SOS, the signs of suicide. And they use this acronym ACT. Acknowledge that this is serious. Acknowledge that your friend has a problem and that, you know, so that's acknowledge and then care. Tell your friend that you care about them. And that, you know, you're going to care enough to take these steps, and then tell a trusted adult. And so I think that that's the programming that we need to get in the schools and let kids know that, hey, this is serious. And, you know, hey, you know, your friend might be upset with you. What I've found is kids are usually very thankful for those that go up and speak up on their behalf and let somebody know, because they're struggling and they just don't know how to get that help.
Yeah, that was my daughter's exact scenario. They had said to another friend, if you tell anybody, we're not friends, and, you know, yada yada yada. And then my daughter caught wind of that. She overheard it. Said, what do I do with this information? And luckily she told us, and she was able to talk to the school counselor And those kids were able to get the help they needed because of that too. And then now they're thankful. So I find that true.
You know, typically in the United States, we lose around 40,000 Americans to suicide every year. And, you know, I love what you said is, yeah, it can be easy just to throw these numbers around. That's 40,000 people. That's people's kids, you know, their daughters and their sons. And that's people's dads and their moms and their brothers and their sisters. And when we open our heart and allow ourselves to really sink that in of this could be somebody that I love and I care about, I think we start to see that this is everybody's business. So again, I'm going to speak in Eagle County. I've been doing this work for 10 years and working really hard. I mean, I have been trying to get these trainings out there. And over the 10 years, I've been able to move the needle on the highest end about 3%. You know, 1 to 3% of Eagle County has been trained, you know, pretty much as a solo effort here. And there are so many gaps. I mean, that like 1 to 3% isn't nearly enough, but we need to get the numbers upwards of like 70 to 100% of people trained in this education so that somebody's daughter doesn't fall through the cracks, that we don't miss it when somebody hears, hey, you know, there's a plan where these kids are thinking about killing themselves, or somebody's offhand comment as they're leaving work, well, you're not going to see me tomorrow. You know, that we don't miss those things and that we catch them because suicide is preventable if we know what to do. And so, you know, I think that that's where conversations like this are really helpful in starting to change that this takes everybody. It takes all parents to come to the table. It takes all teachers. I feel like I'm just talking a lot. I just have so much to.
You're good.
Oh, you're great.
In a school earlier this year, actually it was in the spring of last year, that in one of the schools that I was in, the counselor had told me that this had happened the day before that I came into the school, but a third grader was in gym class and he tried to kill himself with a jump rope in front of all the other third graders and the teacher, right? And so he's trying to kill himself. And as this is happening, the teacher says to the room, well, he'll pass out before he'll ever die. So it's not that big of a deal. And so he continued to do this, and then the class ended. And so here's this kid that's what he's just heard. Like, oh, well, you're not even going to be able to kill yourself. You'll pass out first. So he leaves, you know, the gym class. He's got red marks on his neck from just having a suicide attempt. And he goes to his next class and he's distraught. And so are these other kids that just are witnessing this. He goes to his next class and the teacher kind of senses that there's, you know, something going on, and this kid is crying. And so the teacher tells him, buddy, go to the bathroom, pull yourself together. Like, come on. And so kicks the kid out of class. And so, you know, the message going on in his mind is, I'm not good enough. I'm a hassle. I'm a burden. Nobody cares about me. And this third grader, this is somebody's kid that is going through this in the middle of school. He is at crisis, rock bottom of feeling like he has no place in the world. And he's just been, you know, kind of made fun of in gym. And then he's just gotten kicked out of class to go pull himself together. And so he goes to the bathroom. He continues to try to choke himself in the bathroom until another teacher walks in and was like, what is going on? And so, you know, I think that this is where we're at right now because people don't know better. And if they knew better, they would do better. And this is where this education, these trainings can be life-saving. Honestly, that teacher didn't know better. Either one of those teachers didn't know better. The kids didn't know what to do.
You know,
it's scary and we don't know what to do. And so, you know, I really believe that we all do the very best we can with what we have at the time. But we need to get our teachers trained. We need to get our administrators trained. We need to get our parents trained. And we need to get our kids trained. And the thing is there's funding out here for these trainings. In Eagle County, we offer them all at no cost. We put these trainings out there, and guess what? We have 1 or 2 people show up.
Man.
And it's like, how can we communicate that our kids are dying? You know, like the suicide rates are going up, and it's preventable. So, I don't know, this is a point that gets really, heartbreaking and frustrating to me, but I guess it's just keep speaking up, keep encouraging, wherever you are, whoever's listening, you're a part of a community and you're a part of a group that I'm not a part of. And can we start this conversation by saying, hey, we want to get one of these trainings out there. You can go to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, afsp.org, and find some local trainings. You can go to the state of Colorado, the Colorado Suicide Prevention Coalition. Put my resources up there. I'll be happy to get you in touch with the training, but just say, hey, for one of our men's groups, we're going to do a 1-hour QPR, question, persuade, refer, which is the mental health component of CPR. It's training. What are the warning signs? How do I connect somebody to help? We're going to do that for one of our men's groups, or we're going to do this at the gym one day, or we're going to do this in, the studio where I do yoga. It takes 1 hour, and it can be life-saving. Or you can go online and find these trainings. The QPR training is available online, but we need to have individuals in their community speaking up and saying, hey, I want this for my kids. I want this for my community. I want somebody to be able to look out for me or for my daughter, whoever that may be. And I think that if you take away anything from this talk today, it's please educate yourself and please educate those around you on how to save a life from somebody who's in suicidal crisis. It's way easier than you would think. That sometimes it can just be showing some kindness, but those few steps that you can take are hugely hugely life-saving. And I'm here today because one person had that conversation with me, a conversation that forever changed my life and saved my life.
Molly, as I hear this, it would be easy to say, damn those teachers for not being aware, but they don't know. They don't know. And so how can you fault somebody that doesn't know? I don't pull in scripture. I'm not highly religious in any way. But I imagine Jesus on the cross saying, forgive them for they know not what they do. And it's one of those cases, you don't have to be religious to understand that. But just imagine, I once heard that the most powerful word in the English language was imagine. To put yourself over there of what it might be like for that third grader, this gets me emotional.
Right.
Man, to be over there and to understand what that's like, I can't imagine. No, that's not true. I can't imagine what that would be like. He's calling out for help and nobody's doing anything. He's feeling like I don't matter.
Yeah.
And so just imagine, you talked about 40,000 people a year. Imagine that's your brother, your sister, your child, somebody you care about. Imagine that that's them, and say something. Like you said, 80% reduction just by saying, are you thinking of killing yourself? I mean, I would never think to even ask that question, but now I will. Are you okay? Are you having thoughts of suicide? I mean, imagine what it's like for them to even have those thoughts, because there's a lot of people that can't relate to this. And so they don't do anything. We can change the channel. It's like watching the Bahamas get wiped out, with the hurricane. It's like we can change the channel. I don't have to watch that, but we need to watch it.
No thanks, moving on.
Yeah.
And also, imagine being able to save somebody's life. I have so many examples of that. The one that comes to mind is I did a QPR training for high school, and I'm there, and it's like, oh gosh, is anybody even listening to me? I feel like I'm going through this thing, and it just feels like the glazed look of these high school students, and it can be easy to just be like, this is not doing anything. So I do the training, I leave, and the next day I happen to be back in that school, and one of the girls that was in that class, she just kind of like tugged on my sleeve. She's like, can I talk to you for a second? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And I was astounded, that, okay, that she even recognized who I was. So, okay, she was paying attention. And she said, I really heard what you said yesterday and, listened to that training. And I left there thinking like, I'm never going to need this. But she said, I went on Facebook and my little sister, is her birthday. And I went on and I saw that she had posted, that nobody cares about me. Who even cares about my birthday? And she said, it made me wonder if she was thinking about suicide. So I called my parents and told them I was really worried about her. They went and found, the sister, and she had already started a suicide attempt. So she had ingested some pills. But because the sister knew what to look for, knew what to do to go call her parents, they got this little girl to the ER, saved her life, and so they're in one training, this girl used it the same day, and to know that her sister's alive because of she cared enough to do something about it. And that's, one of the most amazing feelings, to know that I've helped somebody in a way that they're here on the planet today because of something that I said or a small gesture that I did, or to hear that years later, that I was a dear friend of mine said that somebody that, he didn't even really know that well in high school, but so many years later came up to him and said, I'm here today because of you. You always smiled at me, and it was the one thing that I could look forward to coming to school. And so, I don't think we ever can comprehend, the impact that we have or the difference that we make just by who we are, or by saying hi to somebody, or giving a text, if we all took that challenge right now, that I'm sure everyone listening has a cell phone close by. If you just went through your contact list, just pick somebody out of that list and just shoot a quick message. Hey, thinking about you, love you, or you came to mind today and just wanted to do a shout out, say hi, and hit send. The just by the percentages, that in itself could save a life. We just, number one, we don't know what people are going through. We don't know we didn't know. I'm sure the parents didn't know, what that little guy was going through, that little third grader. We don't know what somebody's going through, and we have no idea the profound impact that we can have on a life just by showing up for somebody.
This is a tough topic.
It is a tough topic, but it's much needed. Here.
Yeah. Yeah. So what resources? So you shared some resources. What is your website?
Well, mine is probably not going to be the most helpful for this conversation, but here are some that would. So the AFSP, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, has a phenomenal website. Also, some other resources. If you're worried about somebody, if nothing else, call 911. I know we kind of hesitate, like, I don't want to call the police. That's what they're there for. Tell them what's going on. They will help you work through what next steps need to be done. Or you can call the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can call them and say, hey, I overheard this conversation. I'm not real sure what to do. Or you can call them and say, hey, I'm a parent and I really would like some more education about how to prevent suicide. They're a huge resource if you're worried about somebody, if you have questions, or if you yourself are having suicidal ideation. In the state of Colorado, there's Colorado Crisis Services. They have a fantastic website that has a lot of different resources. Some trainings that I would highly recommend is QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer. It's a 1-hour training and you can get it done online. If you'd like a little bit more than that 1-hour training, mental health first aid. You can go to you can Google that, mental health first aid. For any parents, youth mental health first aid. So youth mental health first aid is an 8-hour course, but the youth version trains any adults working with youth how to recognize the warning signs or the early onset of a mental illness during adolescence, a time when those can be difficult to distinguish. Is this adolescence or is this an early warning sign? Some of those are irritability, moodiness, change in appetite. I mean, that could be any teen, right? And yet those are also warning signs for mental illness.
Me on a daily basis.
Yeah, right? So that training helps you distinguish, how do I tell the difference between typical adolescence and the early warning signs for a mental illness? Most mental illnesses, the onset occurs during adolescence. That's where we're going to see those symptoms. And so not only how to recognize the warning signs, but how to show up in a way that's going to be helpful. And then lastly, ASSIST, which is Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. It's a 2-day training, and I can't think of a better way to educate yourself and prepare yourself for not just suicide intervention skills, but how to have these challenging conversations. How can you show up being a person on the planet that, that is helpful when somebody's going through loss or cancer or divorce, or some of these other, scary life challenges. But that ASSIST model, I think, is one of the best that shows how to have a difficult conversation, how to show up and be helpful for that individual so that they can really see their own wisdom and their own inner knowing and hear their own reasons for, wanting to stay safe for now. So again,
I would almost imagine too, if somebody's going through some kind of a life change, just assume to be safe that there's something going on
right,
for them.
And
ask.
hey, what's going on? And I think we just need to slow down with each other, and check in. Hey, you just don't seem quite yourself today. What's going on? Or
Yeah.
It seems like things have been tough, and it seems like you just haven't been hanging out. I haven't seen you at the gym lately, or hey man, you're always on time to work. And lately it just seems like your heart hasn't been in it. What's going on? That can be a great place to start. And then, if any part of you is worried that maybe they are having some suicidal ideation, ask that question directly. Are you thinking of suicide? And that can be, hey, sometimes when people are going through a lot of loss and, they've, not eating as regularly or having trouble sleeping or starting to lose interest in stuff, like I've noticed with you, sometimes they can be having thoughts of suicide. And I'm wondering, hey, is that on your mind at all?
I think it's in the workplace,
right?
too.
Yeah.
I was talking to a manager and I said, my issues are not yours. And he goes, yeah, they're not. And I think in a way I want to get angry and say, man, have some consideration for what's going on. But again, it goes back to how can you fault somebody that doesn't know?
Don't know, right? And I think
so in our workplace, go ahead.
Extremely fearful of what if I ask that and somebody says yes. I'm not sure what to do. And I think, the greatest thing is just come with gratitude. I'm so glad you told me. Thank you for trusting me with this. Wow, that must have been really hard to say. Or for your kid comes to you and says, hey, some of my friends are talking about this. Start with gratitude. I'm so glad you told me. I can imagine that might have been hard to come and tell me about this. I'm so glad you did. And then the thing is, you don't have to know all the answers. We don't have to fix it. In fact, that's not helpful. But then just connecting that person to help. And again, I'm giving a very short window of what this looks like. These trainings will go more into it. But, hey, let's go get help together. Let's go to the ER. Let's go to your doctor. Who's that? Let's call the National Suicide Lifeline together. But don't leave that person alone and connect them to further help. Again, that's what those national lifelines are like. The Colorado Crisis Services, phenomenal. Reach out to them and say, hey, this is what's going on. But letting that person know that they are so loved and that they're not alone.
And that they matter, right?
Yeah, you matter. Your life does make a difference. And I get you can't see that right now.
Yeah.
You might not be able to see that at all, and that's okay. But I want, I'm going to hold that for you.
Man, Molly, I can tell there's like a reservoir of information behind you that just wants to come out.
Yeah.
And it's hard to it's like you're holding back a bit, but I guarantee you could flood us with information about this. And it means that much to you. And I can tell that just in your conversation because you relate to it. You've been through this. You've gone through, you've attempted.
Right.
I haven't gone that far, but I can relate to the idea that, man, life doesn't have meaning. I don't, what else would you tell somebody in this case? What advice would you give somebody? And I know you've given a ton throughout the whole thing, But what's one more thing that you would say to somebody in this situation?
I think, so could be two situations. Somebody who may be listening who's having thoughts of suicide themselves, or somebody who's listening who loves somebody who's going through this. And, for either situation, I would again say nobody ever got a feeling wrong. You haven't done anything wrong. It's not your fault that you might be feeling that way. Most of the time, there's an underlying mental illness and they are treatable. So, one, you're not wrong for having those thoughts. You're not alone. I can't even begin to tell you how many people, are, one, there, but two, also walking this incredibly challenging road. So you're not alone and you're so loved. And you might not be able to see that in this moment, but having been there myself and on the other side of that, I can so speak that that's true. And yes, suicide is one option. It is one option to end the pain. And I think one thing that's incredibly difficult to see is that the pain is temporary. And I know it doesn't feel like that. It didn't for me. It just felt like this is never going to get better. But the pain is temporary. It will pass. The situation will shift itself, and there's something light on the other side. So suicide is a very permanent solution to a temporary problem. So I guess, more than anything, that you are so loved and you're not alone, and there is help. There's hope and there's hope. Reach out today and call that National Suicide Lifeline. That's, people have a heart for this work, and that's what they're there for. They're there to answer these calls, and they're happy to do it. And again, that's, 1-800-273-8255, or call 911. Again, it's not a hassle or a burden for somebody to take these calls. They do that work for a reason. That's why they're there. They're happy to hear from you.
I think we need to have that number up on this video, like through the whole video.
Right.
And 911, I don't consider that as an option sometimes,
Right.
just to call 911.
Call 911. You're talking to a human being,
Right.
person on the other end of the line, and they're there to help.
And they're likely trained.
They're trained, right? They have been through these trainings, and so you can just tell them what's going on.
Yeah.
Tell them what's happening, or tell them the situation, and they will help you work through it for sure.
Yeah. Ryan, what other thoughts do you have?
I think this has just been great. It's helped me to think about my life, my relationships, to be more aware. And then I wrote down I've got a full page of notes. So we'll go over those things and see what else we can do to further the cause and help as many people as possible, Molly. So that's our commitment to you is that we'll fight with you and continue to spread the message to as many people as we can on our end. We'd love to have you in the future as well. Maybe we can get more in depth on more specific topics, solutions and things like that. Because like you said, you have a ton of information. It looks like you could talk all day about this stuff. This is fantastic. And unfortunately, we don't have a ton of time on these calls, but we'd love to potentially have you back and continue working with you. So thank you so much.
I know that I said a lot, and it can feel like, wow, that's a lot of information all at once. And it is. And I would just kind of sum everything up with two things. One, tell somebody in your life that you love them. Use those words, tell the people in your life who you care about that you love them. Do that today. Don't wait. And number two, take a training. If everybody listening could just commit to that, to the 1-hour gatekeeper training, it's going to really fill in those missing gaps. And if you could just take those 2 steps of action, I don't think you'll ever know the difference you'll make just by those 2 things.
Yeah, that's powerful. I think we need to end it there. Tell somebody you love them, take a training. That's a pretty simple ask.
That's the ask. Yep.
Yep, I'm on board with that. So I'm going to commit to that.
I'll commit to that as well. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you both. Thank you for having the space to have this conversation. I love what you guys are up to. This is how we change. This is how we change the conversation. This is how we reduce the stigma. is it just
Yeah.
starts one conversation at a time. So wholeheartedly thank you. I appreciate you helping me get this information out there and who you guys are in the world. It's huge.
You as well. So yeah, thank you.
Appreciate your time, Molly. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Okay.